Europe in the 21st century is a continent in deep, deep changes. First of all, Europe lost its influence in the world. The economic power of Europe reduced. The cultural impact of Europe reduced. The Europe became a fortress against migrants and assailants, and is a part of the day-to-day killing in the Mediterranean Sea, and has a very unhuman development at all their borders. Europe, the European Union, becomes highly militarized. We have military programs for all kinds of weapons. And the nuclear weapon states in Europe, Great Britain and France, are modernizing their nuclear weapons. We have a continuation of the nuclear sharing in Europe. This means US nuclear weapons on the soil of European countries, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Dutch, and Turkey. And we have a tectonic change of the power structure in the world, and Europe lost its influence. Summarizing, I would say the colonial system, where Europe was in the middle point of the world, is over, is definitely over. Even when many countries in Europe believe that they can continue with their neo-colonial politics to Africa and partly to Asia. But these times become with the new power structure in the world to an end. The second key point are the relations between Europe and the United States of America. And there we also have a change. Europe, the European Union, was trying to the last 10 years to become politically and economically, not militarily, a little bit more independent from the United States, to go more or less for an own economic imperialistic way. But with the war of Ukraine, this way comes absolutely to an end, and the European Union now is militarily and politically a vassal of the US foreign policy. We are following all the rules of the United States, including enlarging their economic dependency from the United States, which means US will win and Europe will lose. To say it in an example, we are now buying the fracking gas, which is 7 times more expensive than the gas before, and it is 5 times more bad for the European environment. And this is only one example. We can continue the examples when we are discussing about high technology development, about efficiency, intelligence, and. So Europe is losing its power in the world. That is my key summary for this. But the European Union does not accept this and militarize itself and be a part of, in the minimum, 15 military conflicts in the world. We are sending troops to Mali, to Niger. We have sent them to Afghanistan. We are engaged in many of the regional conflicts in the world as interventional armies, which are really not welcomed by the people of these countries. This is the role of Europe today, and this process becomes much quicker because of the Ukrainian war. Because the Ukrainian war is a focus point of all conflicts which developed during the last years. One side now, Europe is, by the Ukrainian war, a vassal of the United States. Second, we are the economic loser because we are lost the possibility to get cheap energy from Russia. Third, we are the economic loser because the high prices of energy in Europe now has a consequence of a re-industrialization of the European Union and a leaving of a lot of industry in Europe going to the United States because of the cheaper energy and the huge subventions the US is paying now for new economy, new industry. So that together shows the really difficult situation. This feels internally to a very unsocial politics, because the poor are suffering the most from these developments by not pay the energy prices, cannot pay the housing prices, energy, has the consequences of reduction of the budgets in social, healthy and other affairs, and has the consequences of the development of a right-wing strong party in Germany and in all European countries. We have a right-wing strong party in all Central European countries. France, Germany, Italy. The Prime Minister of Italy is a fascist. We have to say it very clear. And when we would have elections in France for the new president, Le Pen would win. The right-wing party would win. That are the consequences of this development in Europe in the last years. For the peace movement, my last sentence, it makes the situation very, very difficult. We are fighting against the war since the beginning. We are calling for ceasefire and negotiations. We are condemning the Russian aggression, but we are saying the consequence of the Russian aggression is to overcome NATO, because the war was not falling from the heaven. It was prepared by the enlargement of NATO from Central Europe to the east against the Charter of Paris from 1990 and many other agreements of cooperation. So the war was prepared and forced by the NATO countries and the NATO development. This is not an excuse for an illegal aggression against an independent country, but it explained the political background, how and why it happened. And so the peace movement is doing the best, but we are in a very controversial situation with the public opinion. The majority of the public opinion up to now supports the governmental line, and we are hatefully criticized by the media. The media are playing such a war-oriented role I never had expected that they could be. That makes the life and the activities of the peace movement not easier, but we are still active. We had great actions in Italy, Germany, and other countries, and I can definitely promise you that we will continue with these activities. Without ceasefire and negotiations in the Ukrainian war, we will not get a possibility for open a way to a more peaceful cooperative process in Europe. And again, our government must love it or not. By the landscape, Russia will not disappear. It is 1/6 of the world soil. And this will happen also after the war. So we need, again, cooperation relations to Russia. And peace in Europe, I'm deeply convinced about that, is impossible without Russia. So we have to come to new cooperative contexts also with Russia. That are some impressions from Europe. And I have not spoken about the role of Europe in the world, in the role to East Asia. I will only summarize this in one sentence, that for me, the period of the US hegemony is over. We are coming to a new world order. The old world order is dead. The new world order was not really born. It is in development. And these developments under capitalistic circumstances are not peaceful. And this creates a huge danger, even of a nuclear war in the world. And for the peace movement, it is everything to do to avoid such a war, to reduce the nuclear danger, and even hopefully in the future also to ban all nuclear weapons. Thank you, listening to my introductions. It was only thesis, because I had, 10 or 15 minutes, but I hope I gave you some impressions, and hopefully you have some critical questions to my input.
이유에 관해서 좀 말씀해 주셨고요. 지금의 세계 질서에 관해서 좀 유럽의 봐야 되는데 예, 그 EU 자체가 디바이드 됐다는, 그러니까 EU가 지금 분단됐다는 점을 우리가 좀 명심해야 된다는 겁니다. 그러니까 EU라고 하는 곳으로 그 회원국이 된 나라들과 회원국이 되지 않은 나라들 사이에 아주 엄청난 긴장, 이걸 우리가 좀 주의 깊게 봐야 된다는 것이 이제 첫 번째 해주신 말씀이고요. 그 다음에 그 이제 또 하나는 잠시만요, 써놓은 게 안 보여서. 그 지금 현재 EU가 갖고 있는 또 하나의 문제는 그 EU가 과거와 같은 영향력을 이제 상실했을 뿐만 아니라 EU 자체가 굉장히 군사화되고 있다는 점에 우리가 그 주목해서 봐야 된다라고 하는 겁니다. 군사화되는 과정 속에서 우리가 주의해야 될 것은 두 가지 말씀하셨는데요. 하나는 우리가 이제 핵 문제를 많이 얘기하지만 지금 EU가 개발한 무기들은 핵 무기보다 훨씬 더 강화할 아주 신기술에 입각한 무기들이 굉장히 많다라고 하는 점. 그다음에 또 하나는 핵 자체를 어느 국 갖지 않는다 하더라도 EU 회원국이 되면 나토에서 보여주는 바와 같이 핵 공유를 통해서 사실상 핵무장을 EU 전체가 하고 있다라고 하는 점에 우리가 주의 깊게 보아야 한다라고 하는 겁니다. 그리고 이 EU가 지금 그 기대고 있는 것은 과거에도 그랬지만 지금도 마찬가지로 식민주의에 기대고 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 과거에도 식민지 개척을 통해서 EU가 쭉 번성해 왔는데 지금은 직접적인 식민지가 아니라 그 네오콜로니얼리즘이라고 신식민주의, 경제라든지 다양한 방식으로 EU는 여전히 그 하고 저희 식민지에 기대는 방식을 취하고 있는데 그런 EU는 이제 더 이상 영향력이라든지 우리한테 어떤 인스파이링을 준다든지 이런 것들을 하지 못하는, 그래서 EU의 시대가 사실상 지금 가고 있다. 그리고 그 EU의 시대가 가고 있는 그 자리에 미국이 우크라이나 전쟁을 통해서 훨씬 더 EU가 빨리 군사화되고 그 다음에 그 신식민주의를 더 뭐라 그럴까요? 더 이렇게 착취하는 방식으로 지금 변화되고 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 그리고 이제 그런 과정 속에서 그 우크라이나 전쟁은 결국은 미국을 승자로 만들고 EU를 패자로 만드는 그런 그 질서의 변화를 가지고 오는 것에 우리가 좀 주의해야 될 것 같고요. 특히 예를 든다면 가스값이 지금 7배나 올랐다라고 하는 거죠. 그리고 러시아는 결국은 그동안 이제 다 아시는 것처럼 그 노르드 스트림 통해서 가스를 굉장히 싸게 공급해 왔지만 이제 그 유럽 자체가 미국의 경제를 의존하고 에너지를 의존하고 군사력을 의존함으로써 EU는 사실상 미국에 대한 의존도가 훨씬 더 높아지는 그런 국가가 되었다라고 하는 겁니다. 그리고 이런 과정 속에서 그 군사화된 그 EU가 지금 전 세계 한 15개국의 분쟁국에 여전히 개입하고 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 말리라든지 아프가니스탄이라든지 이런 세계 곳곳에 EU가 여전히 과거 식민처럼 그런 군사주의라든지 그런 분쟁에 개입이 되고 있다라고 하는 것에 우리가 좀 주의해야 될 것 같고요. 그래서 결국은 이 우크라이나 전쟁이 빨리 일단 종전을 선언해야 된다는 거죠. 일단 우리는 지금 평화협정을 얘기하고 있지만 일단 우크라이나는 일단 시스파이어를 해야 된다. 그러니까 종전을 해야 되고 유일한 방법은 니고시에이션밖에 없다. 그리고 러시아를 적으로 모는 것은 굉장히 어리석은 일이라는 말씀도 하셨는데 왜냐하면 러시아는 워낙 큰 나라이기 때문에 러시아가 지구상에서 사라진다는 걸 생각할 수가 없다. 그렇다면 러시아하고 어떻게 평화롭게 살 것인가를 얘기해야 된다는 것을 강조하셨고요. 그 다음에 이제 하나 고민이 뭐냐 하면 그래서 유럽에서 평화운동하기가 대단히 어려워졌다라고 하는 겁니다. 유럽에서 평화운동은 지금 굉장히 위기에 있을 뿐만 아니라 특히 평화담론을 대중들하고 얘기가 어려워졌다는 겁니다. 대부분의 대중들이 파시즘하고 연결되어 있고 또 파시스트들이 지금 그러니까 예컨대 아까도 말씀드렸지만 프랑스, 독일에도 그런 징후가 나타날 뿐만 아니라 이태리는 이제 완전히 파시스트가 정권을 장악했고 그래서 평화운동 하는 사람들이 꼭 정부가 아니라 일반 대중들 속에서도 설 자리를 거의 잃었다라고 하는 거죠. 그래서 아까 결론적으로 말씀드린 것은 어쨌든 과거의 질서는 이미 힘을 잃었고 사라지고 있는데 새로운 질서는 아직 나타나고 있지 않고 그래서 그 사이에 이 혼돈의 질서가 지금 어떤 식으로 변화되고 있는데 그 변화의 흐름을 우리가 잘 봐야 될 것 같다. 잘 봐야 될 뿐만 아니라 그런 새로운 동력을 어디서 찾을 것인가 이런 이야기를 하는데 불행하게도 유럽에서 찾기는 대단히 어려운 것 같다는 말씀을 하셨습니다. 대체로 그 정도 말씀하신 것 같습니다. 이거 적어놨어요? Well, I briefly summarize about what you delivered us. Well, originally we would like to have some dialogue. So if you have any questions while you were here already for 1 week, so if you feel something in Korea, as you know, last week we had a 70 years anniversary of ceasefire. You said the ceasefire is necessary in Ukraine war, but we would like to transform ceasefire to peace treaty, but it was in vain, and we just passed more than 70 years nowadays. So if we have any feelings or any questions, it will be good. Not right now, it will be fine.
먼저 이 박사님 유럽 하신 말씀에 대해서 좀
예,
질문하고
예,
코멘트하고
예.
하는 거죠.
저도 이제 우리한테도 질문하시라고 말씀을 드렸고요. 예. 혹시 뭐 아까 말씀하신 것에 대해서 좀 질문이라든지 또 좀 더 듣고 싶으신 이야기가 있으신지요?
아까 그 난민 상황을 잠깐 언급하시면서 아프리카에서 오는 난민들이 그 유럽에서 지금 굉장히 살기 힘든 상황인데 그것이 어찌 보면 유럽 자체를 굉장히 힘들게 만들 수 있는 내지는 유럽과의 관계가 화해되지 않고 난민들을 이렇게 지금은 죽임을 당하는 상황으로까지 가고 있다고 그러는데 그것과 관련해서 조금 말씀해 주시죠.
에어컨을 껐어요.
예. 좀 잠깐 꺼도 될 것 같은데.
근데
예.
이따가 조금 더우면
예, 예.
얘기하세요.
How do refugees and migrants impact Europe? So what is the situation of Europe?
You know, it has a very bad impact of Europe. You know, Europe is always a continent of refugees, asylums and migrants, historically. And now we are trying to develop something like a European fortress, where no one can come in, whom we do not need for economic purposes. So we have the border in the east, which is developed by Poland, which does not allow anyone to cross the border any longer. And some hundreds of young people were killed at this border during the last 1.5 years. Then we have the huge border through the Mediterranean Sea, and in reality, maybe around 20,000 people died during the last years in the Mediterranean Sea because they want to leave Africa, Libya, Syria, and other countries because of the situation in the countries, and they had no legal possibility to come to Europe, so they were trying it in these small boats where they really died, hundreds of them, children, people, women. So that is the undemocratic, unhuman Europe now. And what the European Union is doing is they are trying to develop these fortresses even deeper. The main point is we are now in the situation that we are trying to make agreements with the African countries that the African countries take care of the refugees which were coming from southern Africa to the Mediterranean border and send them back, push them back, send them in the desert without helping them, even without giving them water. We have this now in Libya, we have this in Tunisia, and partly also in Morocco. And the European Union is developing new contracts with these countries, giving them money, that they are closing their border, that no refugees can come to the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the horrible situation we have. And, you know, frankly speaking, I cannot see any way out because the political ruling class in Europe is united in this question to stop the refugees at their border. This is a very sad situation. That is the situation we have to the refugees. People in all the countries are trying to help them where they can. We have these private helping sea boats in the Mediterranean Sea, which has a lot of problems by the official governments. They don't allow them to come into the harbor. They don't allow them to take specific ways to come to specific ports, and a lot of totally unhumanic problems. But that is the reality. That is the new face of Europe. And it makes it not better when the Europeans are saying the same happened at the Mexican border. It only shows how undemocratic and anti-humanity is our political and social system. That is the brutal reality of Europe. Internally, we have the problem, and I think you know this from your country, when refugees are coming and you have in your own country a lot of social problems, then it creates also problems of fights between the traditional living people and the refugees. And when you put the refugees in camps in small villages where poor people are living, where you have bad social conditions, where you have a high rate of unemployment, this creates a lot of internal problems and hate. And this hate goes till to killing refugees. We have also these internal problems in our countries and in all European countries. So again, the poorest are suffering the most. That is the brutal reality when we are describing the refugee situation. And I think I'm totally on the line of the chair of the Refugee Committee of the United Nations, who described it in much better words than I was doing it, but I think in the quite same sense what I'm doing it. It is really very brutal and very hateful situation for all of us.
예, 그 레퓨지 문제는 지금 그 트럼프가 멕시코 차단했던 것처럼 유럽 전체를 요새로 만들고 레퓨지가 들어오지 못하도록 하는 것이 굉장히 지금 유럽의 정부나 또 일반 시민들도 거기에 동조하고 있는 그런 분위기가 굉장히 크다라고 합니다. 그래서 이것은 굉장히 비민주적일 뿐만 아니라 반인간적이고 그다음에 반휴먼적이다 이런 말씀하셨고요. 지난 1년 사이에도 이 보더를 국경을 넘지 못해서 한 2만 명 정도가 일단 죽었고요. 그다음에 또 더 심각한 문제는 이 요새를 만들기 위해서 과거의 식민지였던, 그러니까 예컨대 모로코 같으면 스페인이었죠. 그다음에 튀니지 같으면 이제 프랑스고, 그 북아프리카 일대 국가들한테 돈을 줘서 더 이상 난민을 못 넘어오게 만드는, 또 오면 돌려보내는. 그래서 그게 일단 굉장히 심하고요. 일단 들어온 난민들 때문에 생기는 국내 문제도 굉장히 심각하다는 겁니다. 그래서 일단 들어온 난민들 같은 경우에는 굉장히 열악한 상황에 처하게 되고, 열악한 상황이 노동 조건을 서로 다르게 하면서 난민은 난민대로 힘들고 내국인은 내국인대로 힘들면서 그 안에서 서로 증오하고 또 서로를 죽이려고 하는 이제 그런 일들이 많이 벌어져서 지금 유럽 사회는 굉장히 사나운 사회라고 할까요? 아주 거친 그런 사회가 되어가고 있다라고 하는 말씀을 하셨습니다.
하나 더 질문하면, 아까 그 핵무기보다도 더 강력한 무기 체계에 대한 개발에 관한 질문이 좀 어떤 건지 좀 설명하려고 합니다.
I concentrate on nuclear weapons in Europe because I think about the Asian situation you know much better than me. So we have nuclear weapons of the United States in the following European countries. We have them in Germany, in Italy, in Belgium, in Dutch, and in Turkey. The ownership of the nuclear weapons, of these nuclear weapons on the soil of Europe, is the United States, but the training and in the war situation, the bringing to these nuclear weapons to a goal or to a target will be done by the hosting countries and their armies. That is what we are calling nuclear sharing. And we have a modernization of of these nuclear weapons in all European countries. The new nuclear weapons, the so-called B6112, will deploy during the next 2 years. And the difference is that these new nuclear weapons can reach Moscow and the central capitals or the central big cities of Russia, and they are more detailed, exact on the point. Mm-hmm. And they are flying much nearer to the ground, so it is much more difficult to attack them. So they are highlighting the danger of a nuclear war, because you cannot wait till the other shooting them. You will do it before. So for me, all these nuclear weapons in Europe are magnets, which are crying for the Russian nuclear weapons. Russia, for the first time, deployed also their tactical nuclear weapons in a country outside of Russia, in Belarus. So we have also nuclear weapons now in Belarus. This is the situation. And we have in the Mediterranean Sea and in the North Sea and in the Atlantic the US nuclear submarines. US nuclear submarines with nuclear weapons. That is the correct description. So that is the situation. So then we have 2 nuclear weapon states in Europe which have their own nuclear weapons. That is France and Great Britain. Both are also modernizing their nuclear weapons. And we have a new development since 1 year. The US is bringing back their own nuclear weapons to Great Britain, which they postponed after the Cold War period. So for 30 years there were no US nuclear weapons in Great Britain, but now they are bringing them back. We have in all these countries more or less strong or weak anti-nuclear weapons movements with a lot of activities which are protesting against these nuclear weapons. None of these European countries have signed the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The only nuclear weapons countries which have signed the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is first Austria, which is playing a very, very important role in promoting this treaty. Second, Ireland, which is a neutral country. And third, the third neutral country in Europe, which is Malta, the island Malta. They have signed this treaty, but none of the other countries have signed it, even not the so-called neutral Switzerland. The pressure of the US against Switzerland was so strong that the parliament in Bern, also in Switzerland, postponed the decision to sign the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
그 핵무기를 일단 현대화해서 과거 오래된 핵무 쓰지 않은 핵무기들을 다시 현대화하는 것도 있지만요. 이제 또 하나 아까 B-61이라고 했던 그 핵무기를 이제 도달하거나 혹은 전달하는 그 저희 물체를 굉장히 고도화시켜서 과거에는 그냥 뭐 그 가볍게 떨어뜨리는 방식이었다면 언제 어떻게 갈지 모르는데 그러니까 포착되지 않는 범주 안에서 정확하게 핀포인트로 가서 떨어뜨릴 수 있는 그런 핵무기를 일단 개발해 왔다는 거죠. 그래서 핵무기 전체를 굉장히 빠른 속도로 모더나이즈하고 있고요. 그다음에 유럽에서 그 핵무기를 보유하고 있는 나라는 프랑스하고 원래 영국밖에 없지만 아까 말씀하신 핵 쉐어링, 그러니까 핵 공유라고 하는 걸 통해서 그 미국이 지중해, 대서양, 북해 모든 곳에서 핵 잠수함을 가동시킬 수 있을 뿐만 아니라 또 그 핵무기를 보유하고 있지 않은 국가들은 그 트리티에 가입하지 않았기 때문에 미국이 마음대로 하는 것에 있어 훨씬 더 용이한 그런 부분도 있고요. 예를 들어서 아까 얘기한 것 중에 그 독일, 이태리, 벨지움, 터키 같은 경우에는 이 핵 공유를 이미 미국하고 다 협약을 했기 때문에 핵무기가 없는 것이 아니라 이들 땅에서 핵무기를 그 저희 다룰 수 있는 기술을 트레이닝을 하고 있고 따라서 사실상 핵을 갖고 있는 것하고 다를 바가 없다. 그런 이야기를 해줬습니다. 그래서 지금 핵 위협이라고 하는 것이 훨씬 더 강화할 수준에 와 있고 그 다음에 그 지금 이제 그런 핵무기에 대해서 이 거부하고 있는 오스트리아라든지 아일랜드라든지 몰타라고 하는 나라도 이제는 좀 그런 부분들에 대해서 미국의 유혹에 지금 많이 흔들리고 있는 이제 그런 상황이기 때문에 유럽 전체가 지금 핵 공포에 다시 쌓일 가능성이 대단히 높은데 거기에 대해서 아무도 언급을 하고 있지 않은 이제 그런 그러니까 언급 안 한다는 게 아니라 오히려 그걸 더 조장하는 그걸 더 받아들이려고 하는 그런 상황이 지금 큰 문제다라는 말씀을 하셨어요.
I forgot one
Okay.
state.
Sure.
Is very important.
Yeah.
I forgot the Vatican.
Vatican.
Signed the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
No nuclear.
No, who signed and ratified the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons?
Really?
Yeah. Next to Austria, Ireland, Malta, also the Vatican. Vatican, which is not politically very important.
They should.
예, 뭐 그 정도로 지금 유럽이 핵무기를 공유하는 것에 굉장히 적극적이고 예.
Let me divide my answer in two questions. First of all, the European Union is a totally undemocratic structure. The decision is only made by the head of the states. There is a parliament, but the parliament has no right to interfere in the foreign policy of the European Union. This is only in the hand of the heads of the states. The parliament has some rights, but at the end, they have always to find a compromise with the heads of the state. So there is no parliamentarian control in Europe. So the European Union definitely is a very undemocratic structure. So that is, fighting for I'm very much in favor to have this European Union Parliament because it's the possibility for an exchange. But the Parliament needs all rights, the budget rights and the control rights. Then it is really a Parliament. And even then, you know, like me, in a parliamentarian democracy, there are many, many limitations to the role of the Parliament. But that's the second question. You know, the second question is the question of the governments and the democracy in the different states in Europe. And I will concentrate on the problems of Germany because this I know the best. And also politically and economically, Germany is the biggest or strongest state in Europe, even when they lost some of their influence. The main problem is that more and more people in Europe see the double standards of the policy. Speaking on one side and doing the opposite which they were speaking. They were speaking about social rights and they reduced the social impact for the people. They are speaking about democracy and reduce the influence possibility of the people engaging in democracy by highlighting the role of the government, giving the government always more rights, taking rights away from the parliament to the government, centralize the power structure more to the government. Seeing these double standards by all the environmental policy, on one side, they are saying they are doing more for the environment. On the other side, they are giving money for new coal mines, or buying this horrible fracking gas. So, and these double standards developed a deep mistrust by larger and larger part of the society against not only the government, but also against democracy institutions. And this is the background that the right wing can become slower, because they put their fingers in these double standard policy. And look, you are praying water and drinking wine. And many more and more people which are suffering under the consequences of this policy, by unemployment, by low income, by not having the possibility to be engaged in local activities. Follow this. And this has a second point, and this is deep to explain to foreigners. This has, I will say it, even maybe when you not totally understand it, this has many things to do with the weak left we have in Germany. Normally the left must be the democratic opposition to this, fighting for social rights, for development, against unemployment. But the majority of the left in Germany is waiting for the situation when they can jump into the bed of the government. And this people notice and recognized. And they don't need the left, which is doing the same that the old ones are doing. So the left lost their role as political and social alternative. And this is a huge problem for Germany now. And some of us trying to, redevelop a left as an alternative to the system. And you know, all these mistrust becomes bigger and bigger by what's happened during the Corona pandemic, and becomes bigger and bigger because of the Ukrainian war and the suffering of people because of the Ukrainian war. And this is the background that the right wings are so strong, and many people also abstain to go to elections, which make the ruling class stronger. When you are not voting against, nothing happened. So that is a little bit the background of the development, that democracy in Europe or in Germany, and we have quite the same situation in the surrounding countries. We have a little bit difficult situation when we are going to East Europe, because we never had a really democracy system in East Europe. But you know, for these key countries in Europe, the traditional key countries of Europe, we have always quite the same situation. And the alternative to this situation is, from my understanding, only people's engagement and people's power. And that is the role we have to develop. And this, frankly speaking, we can learn from you. You made it. And what we need in Europe is, I will not say revolution, is a huge change in the direction of democracy. And this is on the agenda of some of our new protest organizations, and also a little bit on the developing in the new left. That is what we need, and this is a not easy process, because this process happened under the circumstances of a war. And frankly speaking, I will say it very clear, Germany is a part of the Ukrainian war. Even when the German government always tried to deny this. When you are sending weapons, the strongest weapons we have, when you are training the forces of Ukraine in Germany, when the airbase Ramstein is a key infrastructure headquarter for the whole war and the engagement of NATO, you're a part of the war. And that is the situation. And the only one who reflects this in a bad way are the German media, because they are so hateful against any protest, because they know how difficult is the situation and how much they need to keep their forces together. That is a little bit the situation in Germany, and we are in a middle point where definitely huge changes will come. They can go to both directions, to a bad or a good way. This is absolutely open. The only thing that I can say for a good way is that we have traditionally quite strong social movements in our country. And when we can strengthen their efforts and unite their forces, we have a good chance, in the minimum, to stop the most worst developments and maybe to change it in a other direction.
그 두 가지 말씀을 일단 하셨는데, 하나는 그 EU 자체가 굉장히 비민주적 구조라는 겁니다. EU 자체가 우리가 흔히 EU를 굉장히 통합적이고 민주적인 구조로 보고 있지만 그렇지 않은데, 그 이유 중에 하나는 EU는 굉장히 그 국가하고 정부에 휘둘리게 되어 있고요, 또 그들만의 리그처럼 되어 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 여기에 대해서 그 뭔가 좀 저항하거나 새로 인풋을 할 수 있는 게 의회인데, 결국 의회는 이제 그 하나는 규제를 만든다는 것, 그 법을 만든다는 것, 그 다음에 재정적 그 통제를 할 수가 있지만, 결국 의회가 결국 국가를 다 따라가고 정부 수반을 따라가기 때문에 결국 의미가 없다라고 하는 겁니다. 그래서 EU 자체가 굉장히 비민주적 그런 틀이어서 EU에 대해서 별로 기대할 게 없다. 그게 첫 번째 말씀이셨고요. 그 다음에 두 번째는 이제 그렇다면 그 국가라고 하는 것이 왜 이렇게 문제가 되느냐. 그래서 독일의 경우를 일단 예를 들어서 말씀하셨는데, 독일의 경우에도 그 굉장히 많은 문제가 있고 국가가 굉장히 강하지만 이 가장 큰 문제는 특히 그 이 진보 진영이 갖고 있는 가장 큰 문제가 우리로 치면 내로남불이라 그래야 될까요? 어쨌든 그 더블 스탠다드라고 하는 것이 굉장히 강하고, 이 더블 스탠다드라고 하는 것이 진보 진영이 가지고 있는 아주 취약점인데, 이 부분들에 대해서 우파가 굉장히 정확히 지적을 하고 있고, 많은 시민들이 여기에 대해서 굉장히 이제는 염증을 느끼기 시작했다라고 하는 것이 결정적이라고 합니다. 이게 독일뿐만 아니라 유럽 전역에서 다 벌어지고 있는 일인데요. 예를 든다면 기후 위기가 굉장히 중요하다고 얘기하면서 계속해서 기후 위기에 악영향을 주는 기업의 주식을 사거나 아니면 계속 거기에 투자한다라든지, 또는 그 뭐 여러 가지 얘기가 많이 있었습니다. 그 제가 지금 다 기억을 못 하겠는데, 근데 그 뭐 사회보장 제도가 중요하다고 얘기하면서 또 실제로는 개인의 어떤 걸 추구한다라든지, 그리고 그 사람들이 어떤 이 뭐라 그럴까, 개입이 굉장히 중요함에도 불구하고 침묵한다라든지, 뭐 그런 굉장히 다양한 방식으로 해서 이 이중잣대를 보여주는 것이 이제 그 사람들한테는 굉장히 실망감을 줬고, 또 우파들이 그런 부분을 정확히 지적해냄으로써 이제는 좌파가 더 이상 정권을 바꾸거나 혹은 잡는 것에 대해서 아무도 기대하지 않고 오히려 침묵하고 있다라고 하는 것이 핵심이다라고 하는 겁니다. 그래서 지금 어쨌든 그런데 그렇다고 뭐 우파가 잘하는 건 아니기 때문에 변화의 가능성은 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 다만 그 변화의 가능성을 만들기 위해서는 이 조용한 강한 그 시민의 힘이 다시 정치권으로 돌아와야 되는데, 이제 이게 계속되다 보니까 이 그 과거에 이런 그 좀 좌파나 진보 진영에 있던 사람들이 굉장히 침묵하고 그다음에 선거판에 이제 가지 않는다는 거예요. 투표하러 가지 않는데, 이들이 다시 그 돌아올 수 있도록 이것을 어떻게 다시 그 뭐 회복하고 이걸 다시 재활성화시킬 수 있을 것인가, 이제 이것이 아주 굉장히 중요한 키포인트다, 이렇게 말씀을 하셨어요. 우리도 근데 사실 좀 비슷하지 않나요? 예, 예, 최 선생님.
연관해서 간단히 EU의 형성을 뭐 여러 가지 의미가 있겠지만 그 평화를 위해서 친일과 한 것을 이렇게 기대했던 바가 있는데, 지금 이제 얘기 들으면서 느끼는 바는 과연 EU의 그 형성이 국가 간의 어떤 갈등을 조정하고 평화를 위한 그 역할에 기여를 하고 있는지, 아니면 정반대로 오히려 유럽 전체를 군사화하고 또 다른 차원에서 갈등을 더 야기하는, 긴장을 야기하는 그런 역할을 하고 있는 건지, 이제 저희 우리 동아시아에서도 뭐 동아시아 공동이집 이런 것을 얘기할 때 어떤 현실적인 모델은 꼭 같지는 않겠지만 EU를 연상을 하는데, 만약에 EU가 그렇게 적극적인 역할을 하지 못한다면, 그 비민주적이고 뭐 이렇다면은 그 희망도 좀 무참해지는 거. 예, 그래서 어떻게 평가하시는지. 예.
You know, for me, the idea of the European Union is definitely a great idea. That countries which were in war for centuries are working together is a great idea. And the idea of the reconciliation process between Germany and France, above all, was definitely a great idea. It is a great idea. And all the youth programs and the programs which were developed were very, very needed and helpful. And the project of the European Union, since the start point, the middle of the 50s, was for many, many years to be, from the international politics, an alternative project to the imperial militarized policy of the United States. So the European Union has, till 2009, no military budget and no military program. It was only a civilian program that was creates a new vision for international, more cooperative policy. But it changed. In 2009, with the Lisboa Treaty, they start developing military program of the European Union. First, they say the European Union is supporting the national military industry by developing common projects. Then they were saying we are developing common military maneuvers, strategies, even common military forces. Like we have common brigades from Germany and Poland, from Germany and Dutch. We have a common European Union headquarters in the east, in the Baltic Sea, which include all the European Union countries in the Baltic Sea. And this was developed since 2009. There was only one problem which they have to solve. What are and were the relations between the European Union militarized programs and NATO? And for many, many times, NATO said, we don't want to have this European Union militarization because everything that has to do with military is under the control of NATO. Very easy, it's under control of the United States of America. They don't want to have an independent military power in Europe. Very clear. So the Europeans were very cautious to develop steps in the direction of militarization, but not very much. The 60 years anniversary of NATO was 2009 with the summit in Strasbourg. Under the leadership of Obama, changed this. For the first time in the declaration of Strasbourg, NATO, and this means the US, accepted the European Union militarization. The formulation was, the European Union developed independent but connected military forces. So they are in strong contact with NATO headquarters. And there is a common subgroup which is coordinating NATO and European Union. Because the US at that time recognized that it would be great when the European Union take over some more military efforts in the world, which the US has not to do, above all in Europe. This means Kosovo, Balkan, Southern Europe. And since that, under the leadership of NATO, the European Union developed their militarization. And above all, they tried to develop the European military industry. So we have now combined military industry for aircrafts, Airbus, for tanks, for small weapons, and for the Marines, subways and frigates. So this is the part of the militarization of the European Union. And with the pivot of the United States to Asia, there's even a new role of these European Union military forces. They should take care of all the conflicts in the surrounding of Europe, which means Southern Europe and North Africa, so that the US can strengthen their forces and concentrate their forces, I think you know this, to Asia, above all, to China. That is the new, it is now a burden sharing. It is absolutely burden sharing, but it's a burden sharing under the control of the United States, because many of the technological advancement, satellites, all the control systems are organized over NATO. Europe is much too weak to have this totally independent from the United States. So the last word also over the European military forces will be said by the President of the United States. That is the reality. So, and this is the militarization of the European Union, which strengthens the forces of NATO, which changed the goals or the targets of the European Union away from civilian hilt to military. And there is a second very difficult point, I will mention it shortly, but when you are saying you want to follow the European Union, you should be very careful. European is for Europe the center of the neoliberalistic brutal policy. The neoliberalistic policy first was developed by Thatcher and Reagan. I think all of you know this. But then it was taken over by the European Union. And the European Union forced quite all the European Union states, including all the new ones, to follow these neoliberalistic rules. And I think I have not to explain to you what does this mean from the social perspective, from the perspective of the people, from the budget project, and. So when you want to develop international organizations, and I'm always saying this to my friends, be very careful. What is the political and economic background of the policies of these international corporations? And this neoliberalistic behavior has a second point, that in the European Union, you have also a first class and a second class of countries. The first class of countries are these countries with traditional, high developed industry. And the second class of the countries are the poor countries where they're putting their industry for getting cheap, with a cheap loan for cheap productions for the companies in the first world. You know, Germany is economically occupying all the East European countries. When you are coming to any of these East European countries, you will find all the German companies. Volkswagen is producing their cars much cheaper in Poland and in Bulgaria and Romania than at home. So this is the first, and I can tell you thousands of examples. This is the first class and the second class. But these, and this is also not what I'm feeling international cooperation on the same eye level. So in this case, these countries are totally depending from the so-called main European countries. It's mainly Germany, partly France, a little bit Italy, and in the past it was also a little bit Great Britain. But, so that is, so be very careful when you discuss about the European Union as something what you follow up. Look at it, what is the policy background, what's the economic background, and then you can see what you can take and where you should be very, very careful. I'm happy that we have a European court. I'm happy that we have a Europe without borders. But, you know, they always change this when they think it's not necessary. You know, when too many refugees are coming, they close the borders. But the general idea to have a Europe without borders is a fantastic idea. Yeah? We have new regions of common work along the traditional borders. So Dutch and German people along the borders, they are working much closer together than the German region is working together with other part of Germany. That's a great progress. We have the same in the south part of Germany. And we start having this between some parts of East Germany and Poland, which is great, which creates a new culture, new relations between the people, reduce hate. So we have a lot of positive points which you could have in mind, but please always have in mind what are the basic and the dominating things, and then I think you can only be very, very critical to the development of the European Union during the last 10 or 15 years.
질문이 뭐였죠, 선생님?
EU가 그 갈등과 긴장을 완화시키는 역할을 하는지 아니면 오히려 또 다른 갈등과 군사화를 더 유럽 전체 군사를 촉발시키는지.
이제 그렇다는 얘기죠. 그렇다는 얘기인데 그 이야기를 이제 어떻게 하셨냐 하면 그 초기에 EU가 1950년대 석탄 공동체부터 쭉 발달하는 과정의 그 아이디어는 굉장히 멋있고 근사했다라고 하는 겁니다. 그런데 국경을 없애고 그 다음에 유러피언 시민을 만들고 그리고 서로 협력하고 그리고 공동의 재판소를 둔다라든지 이런 것들은 굉장히 근사한 아이디어였는데 21세가 되면서 굉장히 상황이 바뀌기 시작했고 유럽은 그 군사화에 눈을 돌리기 시작했을 뿐만 아니라 2009년이 되면 유럽에서 그 군사비를 지출하지 않던 나라들이 군사비에 관심을 갖고 EU의 그 공동의 방위를 군사력으로 좀 만들어 보자라고 하는 얘기가 본격화되기 시작했다고 합니다. 특히 그 보아 회의 이후 2009년 이후에 이제 그게 굉장히 본격화되기 시작했는데 바로 그때 오바마가 그 프랑스 스트라스부르는 아시겠지만 독일하고 접경 알자스 로렌 지방이잖아요. 거기 와갖고 이제 그 이야기한 것 중에 하나가 그 미국 입장에서 보니까 유럽의 군사력을 별도로 갖는 것, 나토 말고 하는 것이 대단히 위험할 뿐만 아니라 오히려 그런 에너지를 나토로 갖고 들어오면 미국이 훨씬 더 효과적으로 EU의 에너지와 그러니까 EU의 군사비와 여러 가지를 활용할 수 있지 않을까. 이게 접목이 되면서 오히려 역설적으로 오바마 때 그 아까 말씀하시기는 이런 그 EU의 여러 가지 그 군사력에 대한 욕망을 나토가 흡수하는 방식으로 변화되면서 EU가 훨씬 더 그런 부분에 대해서 군사력을 키우는 그렇게 되었다라고 하는 겁니다. 이제 그렇게 되면서 그 아까 이제 말씀하셨던 것들 중에서 그 두 가지 잣대, 다시 말하면 이제 군사력을 강화하면서 네오리버럴리즘에 거의 종속됐을 뿐만 아니라 이제 그렇게 진행이 가고 있고요. 그리고 EU가 통합이 된 것 같아서 그러면 평등해져야 되는데 EU 안에서 계급 사회가 발생하기 시작했다라고 하는 겁니다. 그래서 그 퍼스트 클래스 국가가 있고 세컨드 클래스 국가가 있는데 예를 들면 독일 같은 폭스바겐 같은 경우 루마니아나 불가리아 같은 데를 자기 집 드나들 하면서 차값을 더 싸게 노동력 싸니까 그래서 이제 그런 걸 본다면 EU라고 하는 것이 불평등을 오히려 구조화시키고 심화시키고 그 다음에 미국하고의 결탁 속에서 군사력을 오히려 더 이상하게 강화시키는 그래서 초기에 EU의 구상, EU의 어떤 비전, 정신 이런 것들은 지금 거의 사라져 버리고 말았다. 그래서 EU는 지금 거의 위기와 몰락과 그 다음에 그 힘도 잃어가고 있고 네오리버럴리즘과 신식민주의에 더 기생하는 그리고 예를 든 그 아직 아까 마지막에 하나 예를 든 것 중에 하나가 예를 들어서 EU가 그러면 그 국경이 없다. 국경이 없어서 왔다 갔다 하지만 갑자기 난민이 들어온다 그러면 국경이 다시 또 생겨나는 거죠. 그래서 못 들어오게 한다라든지 다시 요새로 만든다든지. 그러니까 이런 그 EU 자기중심적 잣대가 결국은 EU의 초기 정신하고는 굉장히 상반됐고 그래서 이제 군사화되어 가고 있고 그다음에 미국에 조금 끌려간다 그럴까요? 뭐 그런 것도 있고 그다음 안에서 계급화되고 있고 이런 이야기를 말씀하셨어요. 예, 그 심각한 거죠. 여기서 제가 그냥 하나 다른 질문 하나 좀 드려볼게요. 아까 사실 같이 만나서 오면서 했던 얘기인데요. 그 이분이 이제 아까 무슨 얘기냐면 그 이 새로운 비전과 희망이 아까 새로운 질서 근데 아시아에 있다고 그랬는데 정말 아시아에 있다고 생각. 제가 보기에는 지금 EU 현상이나 아시아 현상이 뭐 다를 바가 없는데.
제 얘기가 그 얘기였어요. 아시아가 그걸
그래서 아시아에서 어떤 희망을 도대체 보고 계신지. 아까 EU가 망해가는 거 똑같은 거 우리 경험하고 있지 않나요? 그래서 왜 유럽은 아시아를 희망으로 보고 있는지 한번 좀 여쭤보고. 예.
한국에서 어떤 희망을
You got it? Because your explanation about the euro, why Europe lose their hope and control and etc. The same thing actually happens in Korea in the same reason. So, in what perspective do you find some hopes in Asia?
You know, I also will divide the answer in two parts. First of all, the part to Korea. You know, coming from Germany, coming from a divided country for more than 40 years, and in the year 1989, no one was expected any unification.
Mm-hmm.
So never forget there will be historical situations which you cannot expect in advance, which are coming. And then you have to take the chance and use the chance. And I hope that you will make it much better than we have done it at that time, because the process of unification was terrible. But historically, history is not going step by step. There are also quality jumps in history from time to time. And we always should be aware of that and have a feeling for such a situation. So I'm quite sure that the moment will come where there will be also the chance for the Korean unification. And then I can only repeat myself, do it much better than we have done it in Germany. Maybe you translate this and I will get this.
Yeah, sure. 그 일단 그 이제 질문은 민지 씨가 해주신 것 같고, 그 일단 하나 이제 여기 한국 와서 아까 한국의 희망이냐는 말씀하셨는데 하나 분명히 얘기하고 싶은, 아마 다 아시는 얘기일 수 있는데 1989년에 동서독이 그렇게 통일이 될 때 아무도 예측하지 못했고 그거에 대한 당혹스러움 그리고 그것에 대한 후유증을 아직도 우리가 느끼고 있다라고 하는 거죠. 그런 의미에서 이 역사라고 하는 것이 스텝 바이 스텝으로 가지 않고 어느 날 갑자기 흔들리는 역사 속에서 점핑되기도 하고 망하기도 하고 이런 변화가 오는 것이 역사다라고 생각한다. 근데 그런 맥락에서 보면 한국에도 언젠가 그런 굉장히 흔들리는 역사적 모멘텀이 통일이 된다든지 아니면 뭐가 된다든지 그런 것이 올 거다라고 자기는 확신한다. 여기까지 말씀하셨어요.
The second part is the question of international hope. Yes, I have deep hope. For my understanding, we are in a situation of a tectonical change of the international power structures. The US as a hegemony in the world, this time is over. And we are coming now in a very difficult and very dangerous process to a more multipolar world. And this new multipolar world opens a lot of new opportunities for many countries in the world. For example, the African countries, they have really a chance to sit as an equal partner at the table. And for me, it is highly interesting that the main discussion about a peace process in Ukraine is done on one side by the African countries, African Union, and maybe the South African president with others, and the second from Brazil and the Latin American countries. So this multipolar world will not be the best world of the world, but it will be a world where many other countries have the possibility to sit as equal partners in discussions and developments. And this creates many, many hopes for reducing the militarism, reducing the military budgets, create new possibilities for fulfilling the sustainable development goals, and for fulfilling also the obligation of the Paris Agreement to climate change. But this process is a very dangerous one, because these parts of the world which are losing power, United States and Europe, will not give up without fights. And to develop these fights in a way that it will not destroy the whole world by wars, even by nuclear war, that is the challenge we are facing now. And the Ukrainian war is only the top of the examples for that. We can also mention others. So yes, the hope is that these changes cannot be corrected back, that it will not work. And we have to do everything that these changes will go so peaceful as possible. But I see these possibilities by developing a new coalition in the world. This is a coalition between governments of the Global South, parliamentarians mainly of the Global South, but also of other countries, and the social movements as a common new force. I call it, along Bush, a new coalition of willing, which can create so much efforts that it can force the imperialistic countries not to use the weapons, above all not to use the nuclear weapons. That is for me the situation we have. This is a huge challenge, but it is also a huge chance for coming to a new polar world which opens the way for a better world.
예, 그 두 번째는 지금 굉장히 힘든 상황에 우리가 지금 처해 있고요. 이 힘든 상황이라고 하는 것은 지금 굉장히 전술적 변화, 아까 말씀하셨던 이제 새로운 변화를 하는데 미국이 계속해서 자기 헤게모니를 강화하려고 하는 이제 그 과정이 사실은 굉장히 어렵고 위험성이 굉장히 높다라고 하는 겁니다. 예를 들면 지금 우크라이나 전쟁이 대표적인 케이스인데요. 이거는 자칫하면 뭐 핵전쟁으로도 갈 수 있고, 근데 핵전쟁을 감수하고라도 이러한 그 위험한 위기를 볼모로 해서 어쨌든 그 헤게모니를 가지려고 하는데, 그런데 바로 이 시점에서 굉장히 새로운 변화가 일어나고 있다는 걸 목격한다는 겁니다. 예를 든다면 우리가 별로 생각하지 않았던 아프리카 국가들, 힘없는 아프리카 국가들이 새로운 코올리션, 연합을 통해서 여기 힘의 밸런스를 만드는 역할을 하려는 조짐들이 보이고 있다라고 하는 거죠. 예를 들면 우크라이나 문제에 있어서도 평화협정 같은 거라든지 니고시에이션을 아프리카 국가들이 적극적으로 하겠다라고 나서는 모양이라든지, 또는 브라질의 룰라가 지금 됐지만 어쨌든 브라질이 또 그 이른바 글로벌 사우스라고도 우리가 부르잖아요. 그래서 그쪽에서도 그 새로운 다중심 사회로 우리가 이제 가는 그런 하나의 변화와 조짐들이 지금 굉장히 조심스럽게 보이고 있다. 이제 그런 의미에서 보면 EU나 미국은 힘을 사실상 상실해가고 있는 것인데, 그들이 힘을 상실하지 않기 위해서 굉장히 위험하고 어려운 도박을 계속해서 감행할 가능성이 여전히 대단히 높다. 그래서 하나 방법은 그런 그 위험하고 어렵다라고 하는 것은 결국 핵무기를 쓴다거나 전쟁을 일으키거나 아니면 사람을 많이 죽이는 대량살상 같은 것들이 이루어지고 하는데, 그런 걸 선택하지 않고 연대할 수 있는 새로운 뉴 콜리션이 어떻게 가능할 것인가. 근데 그런 조짐이 지금 일어나고 있기 때문에 그거를 좀 확대하는 데다가 우리가 조금 더 신경을 쓰고 봐야 하지 않을까, 이런 말씀하셨어요.
The European Union and many countries in Europe are applying economic sanctions against North Korea for a long period of time. But this sanctions has no result on reducing nuclear weapons in North Korea. North Korea keep on developing more and more number of weapons and missile system, including the nuclear, the mines and things like that. So there is a suggestion that we change this kind of sanctioning policy 100-degree turn around and apply kind of economic support to North Korea for the future, so that the North Korea can entertain better quality of life. U.S. sanctions result in human rights violations in North Korea because many North Koreans are starving and dead. So the suggestion is South Korea, U.S. alliance invite North Korea as one of the partners of this trilateral alliance, so that we create a more and better peaceful situation in the region. And now the Kissinger visiting Xi Jinping, making détente, the easing the tension between China and USA. So we can work together with USA, China, North Korea, and South Korea, more of like a form of alliance, so that we can develop more of the feasible, sustainable peace regime in this region. And what do you think?
You know, the answer to Korea is your answer. I will not interfere in this. But, you know, let me say two sentences in general. First of all, I'm deeply against sanctions. Because sanctions always are mainly against the poor. Because the rich have always possibility to go around the sanctions everywhere in the world. And when I'm looking to the sanctions over the last 6 years, maybe we start with Cuba, then we see the consequences of the sanctions, who they meet and who survived. And even, you know, when I'm looking to the Russian oligarchs, which should be beaten by the sanctions, I cannot see this. Look to London City. 2/3 of the big houses in London cities are owned by the Russian oligarchs. Can you see that they are back to the British people? I can't see this. The people which are the victims of the sanctions are to 80-90% the poor ones. And I will not repeat the sentence of Marvin Albright, which he was saying about the 500,000 killed kids in Iraq. So sanctions are the wrong way to go. For me, the right way to go, and I was saying this several times in my presentation here, is to go the way of common security. We have to take into account the security interests of my country and the security interests of the opponent. And then to look for common interests and for balancing the interests. Cooperation, dialogue, negotiations are the key words of this common security policy. And the first step is trust building. And that is the only way how we can overcome deep divisions in the different areas of the world. Europe was showing this in the 70s and 80s. The cooperation dialogue in Europe reduced the Cold War, bring even the Cold War to an end. And without the policy of common security, we never had the German unification. Common security, the dialogue with the other side, opened the door, even developed and helped developing internal changes on the other side, and opened the door for unification and create a new Europe of peace. And the highlight of this was the Charter of Paris in November 1990, signed at that time by 57 European countries. 57 means the European countries and the former Soviet Union republics. And we said only dialogue, cooperation, no military actions, reducing of military is the way for our common future. And it was a shame and a pity that at the same time the NATO countries signed this document. That was the first plan developed for the NATO development to the east, for the NATO enlargement to the east. At the same time, we know this now, we know the documents. The first document by NATO headquarters which was presented to the governments was in 92. This means it was developed in 91. And the treaty was signed in November 1990. So you can see again the double face or the double standard of the Western policy, above all at that time of the US policy. So that shows that for me, what we need in all regions, and also as a result of this, after the Ukrainian war, is again to come back to the policy of common security. And what we have to develop is strategies for a common security policy in the different parts of the world, because it will be definitely different in Europe and in other parts of the world. This is a huge challenge for science, for peace movement, also for education process, to develop concrete steps for ways to common security in the different regions of the world. We are working on a new peace architecture for Europe, and IPB established with colleagues from Korea, Japan, even from China, a working group which will hopefully develop some ideas for a common security process in Northeast Asia. I think this is a key challenge for all of us, because not sanctions, not confrontation, not maneuvers, this is not the future. When we really want to go for an alternative way, we have to look for ways in the direction of common security, and this means as a first step trust building. And from my understanding, for trust building, civil society can again do a great job in trying to develop so many contacts to the so-called opponent and the country of the other side as possible, to create an atmosphere in both society which opens the door and the floor for a policy of common security. I can only underline, I was a child and was a part of the development of the common security policy in Germany in the 70s. My first election I was doing was for Willy Brandt in 72. I was going on the streets when the conservatives tried to push him out of the chancellor's office, but they failed. And for me, this is a deep understanding that you have to understand not only your position, that you always have to understand the position of the others, to think about the position of the others. You have to understand that why he is saying this and why he is doing it. And when you understand this, you can develop common points, and you have a much better situation also to criticize the position of the others. I always repeat the important sentence from the strongest advisor of Willy Brandt, Egon Bahr. I think many of you know him. He was saying, when I start understanding, and he means the 70s, the policy of the Soviet Union at that time, when I understand it, I could start discussing with them, and I could develop suggestions for common agreement. But first of all, and he underlines this in his book, first of all, I have to start to understand it. And I think this is the key point which we have to do. We have to educate ourselves to understand it, and then we have to see what are the common points, and where we have different points, maybe we have to put them a little bit by side and look for the common points and develop a strategy which hopefully leads to a more peaceful world. I think this is the background of the Olaf Palme agreement, Olaf Palme report to common security, and this is also the background of, I can also ask you to read it, the report the International Peace Bureau developed with the International Trade Unions Confederation and the Olaf Palme Center last year, where we are trying to update the common security approach for the 21st century. I think it's a good document which we have now to deepen and to develop in reality.
Is it in IPB?
Yes, we found in the website, IPB website.
Okay.
In several languages, I think. Not Korean, I think, but Chinese.
I see. 아까 이제 두 가지 말씀을 하셨는데요. 하나는 노jon 선생님 말씀하셨던 그 북한 생션 문제에 대해서 일단 생션은 무조건 좋은 결과 갖고 온 적이 역사로 한 번도 없었다라는 말씀. 하셨고요. 그래서 결국 생쇼는 가난한 사람들을 더 힘들게 만드는, 그리고 가난한 사람 더 양산하는, 그래서 생션 자체는 본인은 절대로 반대한다는 입장을 하나 분명히 말씀하셨고, 그 다음에 두 번째는 이 한반도 문제뿐만 아니라 아까 여러 가지 그 갈등 문제를 푸는 데서 가장 중요한 것은 커먼 시큐리티를 구축하는 것이 가장 중요하다라는 말씀하셨고, 커먼 시큐리티를 구축하는 것 중에 가장 중요한 첫 번째가 트러스트 빌딩인데, 상대를 어떻게 이해하느냐, 상대 포지셔닝을 자기가 잘 이해하는 것에 대해서 중요하다. 이분이 그러니까 청년 시절에 이제 빌리 브란트를 지지하고 할 때에도 빌리 브란트가 독일하고 대화를 나눌 때 빌리 브란트 나중에 그런 얘기를 썼지만 가장 자기가 먼저 시작했던 것은 러시아의 입장이 무엇인지를 이해하는 것에서부터 시작했다. 그래서 무엇이든지 어쨌든 이 시작하려고 한다면 왜 저 사람이 저런 이야기를 할까? 왜 무엇을 저 사람이 지금 원할 것인가? 여기에 대해서 우리가 깊이 생각하지 않는 한, 다시 말하면 대화하지 않는 한 아무것도 얻을 수가 없다. 그래서 코퍼레이션 오브 다이얼로그 혹은 다이얼로그와 코퍼레이션 두 가지를 어떤 식으로 진행해 나갈 것인가 대단히 중요하고, 사실은 동서독일 통일이 된 결정적인 이유는 1970년대 80년대 독일이 이런 상대에 대한 이해를 하려고 한 노력을 했었기 때문에 가능하다라고 하는 겁니다. 그 이유 중에 하나는 상대를 이해하려고 하다 보니까 상대방에서 내적 변화가 일어나기 시작했다는 겁니다. 그래서 인터널 체인지가 다른 쪽에서 일어나게 되는 것은 상대방이 뭔가 들으려고 하고 자꾸 얘기를 들어주고 자기를 이해하려고 하다 보니까 자기가 변화된다는, 그것이 국제정치에서도 굉장히 중요한 것이었고, 그런 맥락에서 본다라고 한다면 이 나토가 다시 부활하는 것은 굉장히 수치스럽고 유럽인으로서 굉장히 창피한 일이고 굉장히 위험한 일이기 때문에 이 부분을 어떻게 지금 극복해야 될지 잘 모르겠지만 결국은 그런 시민들, 그래서 이 대화하고 상대방을 이해하는 것은 그냥 되지는 않고요. 아까 얘기할 때는 이거 굉장히 스스로 교육하는 방식, 여러 사람이 교육하고 여러 사람이 공동으로 이 트러스트를 갖고 있을 때, 그래서 이것은 국가에서 얻기보다는 시민사회에서 얻을 수밖에 없는 가치다. 이런 말씀도 하셨습니다. 예. 시간이 한 10분 정도밖에. 예.
Actually, you help me understand a lot better what you said about common security and trust building. But I want to kind of pose a question about the framework that we are using. When I hear the word security, it already seems to presuppose that there is a threat. Okay, So when we say common strategy, who is included in that common? Okay, that's where my mind was going, because when EU decided to militarize itself, they were in a way developing common strategy. So how do we take away this line that divides us, and also there is power differential between the two opposing sides or whatever. Who is to understand whom? Right? I think the countries without power understand the ones with power very, very well. But the reverse is not true. So I think it's fine to say develop common security, but I think process-wise, I would like us to think more strategically and carefully. Thank you.
You know, yeah, common security is not a pacifistic program. That is, it's yeah, that must be clear. Yeah, it's a program which has one key point, and that's the revolutionary point. It wants to exclude war from the international policy, not more, not less. And it is not a program which is making a totally equal, best developed, democratic, social, environmental world. But it's a way which helps to come out of one of the deepest crises we are facing. So that is, and it is a project which includes governments and states. It needs the help and support and the actions of the peace movement to promote it, but it is also a governmental program, and it will be developed by governments. And when you are coming back to the history, when the first Common Security Report was developed, it was 1982. Remember 1982, it was also a situation of confrontation. And it was a great success that leading personalities from both sides were sitting together and developed a strategy of common interests. That was what was done with the first Common Security Report. And my thinking is that we now need the same. And for me, common security opens, hopefully, the way to a better world. Not more, not less. And that is the reason I promote it now, because we are now in the absolute opposite of it. We are in the danger of destroying ourselves. And the way we can open the way is that we say, okay, we accept that both sides have security interests, legitimate security interests, and we try how we can combine this legitimate security interest without going to war, with reducing the military forces, with reducing the danger of a war, with reducing above all the nuclear weapons, with developing more contacts, more relations, more negotiations, more contracts between the countries, and on this way opened the way to a better world between the countries and between the regions and worldwide. So it is neither God, not everything well. It is a strategy for overcoming the most worst historical situation. This was in 1982, the situation where we are near to a nuclear war, and we have quite the same situation under other conditions, but quite the same situation now. So all the critics which are saying this is not the best of the world are totally correct, and I can only underline this, but it is the strategy for come from a very worse situation to a situation which opens the floor and the door for developing strategies for really a better world. This is why I'm saying it hopefully opens the floor to put the sustainable development goals again on the agenda. Who is speaking about the sustainable development goals? No one. They should be, Gutierrez was saying they should be ready in 2030. He's a dreamer. Yeah, but we need this. Otherwise, we will never come to a more equal world. We will never avoid deep conflict, end. And there is a second point for common security. Can you imagine that without cooperation, we will solve one of the global problems of the world? Can you imagine that in a situation of totally confrontation, we will come nearer to a solution to the climate challenges? I can't imagine this. Can you imagine that we are coming without common security relations to solve the problem of diversity, to solve the problem of water, to solve many other of the global problems? All of these problems need an atmosphere of cooperation between the countries. And this could create by the policy of common security. So again, it could open, not more, it could open the door for developing strategies and solutions also for solving the global problems of the world. So that I'm speaking, common security could be helpful for 2 points: the regionalization of solving conflicts and solving conflicts on the global level, the so-called globalization of the conflicts. That, for this, the strategy of common security could be helpful, and when this could be done during the next years or next 10 years, it hopefully could help saving this world, which from my understanding is in such a deep crisis that we have to do everything to come out of this confrontational situation.
예, 질문은 이제 커먼 시큐리티를 그냥 아까 강조하셨는데 이윤주 목사님께서 질문하신 거는 커먼 시큐리티를 강조하는 거에 적을 상정하는 거고, 그렇다면 도대체 누가 누구의 입장을 생각한다는 거냐라고 좀 근본적인 질문을 하셨고요. 거기에 대해서 지금 브라운 선생님이 말씀하신 것은 커먼 시큐리티는 기본적으로 이 평화적인 접근법은 아니다. 그런데 현실적인 접근법이라고 우리가 생각한다면 커먼 시큐리티는 공동의 적을 상정한다기보다는 공동의 안전, 그러니까 적이 없다라기보다는 공동의 안전을 같이 도모하기 때문에 적어도 이거를 국가적 차원, 국익 차원이 아니라 리저널 차원에서 고려할 수 있고, 그 다음에 이것이 결국은 글로벌 차원으로 확장할 수 있는 확장성을 가질 수 있고, 이것이 확장이 되게 되면 커먼 시큐리티라고 하는 것은 리저널 레벨이든 글로벌 레벨에서 무엇을 줄일 수 있냐 하면 군비 지출을 줄일 수가 있고, 그 다음에 우리가 생각했던 적을 줄일 수가 있고, 그 다음에 글로벌 아젠다, 예컨대 기후 위기라든지 또는 아까 환경 오염, 그다음 전염병, 뭔지 이런 여러 가지 문제들을 하나의 시큐리티 문제로 봄으로써 협력의 기회를 더 넓힐 수 있기 때문에 오히려 이것이 평화주의적인 접근법은 아니지만 적어도 악한 것을 더 줄일 수 있고, 그 다음에 우리한테 공동의 위기를 일으킬 수 있는 문제들에 대해서 공동으로 대처할 수 있는 협력의 틀을 만들 수 있다는 점에서 커먼 시큐리티라고 하는 것은 더 나쁜 상황으로 가지 않는 현실적인 대안으로서 이야기될 수 있다. 그렇게 이야기를 하셨어요. 예. 예. 저기 손을 드셨어요.
앞으로 우리가 피스 진로하고 여기 대부분의 단체가 평화운동 기독교의 입장에서 어떻게 연결을 해서 협력할 수 있을지.
IPP.
Thank you for sharing your thought, which is really insightful today. It's going to be a big story, but could you tell me briefly about your thoughts on the U.S.-China relation from a European?
Suddenly,
I know, but from a European perspective, for building trust and peace, because that's going to be really helpful to Korean people because we have no choice. between two, what I'm saying. So, can we have any expectation to China, or what is the role for peace?
Sorry.
No, I know it's a long story, but could you tell me briefly?
Briefly a lot.
No, the reason why the confrontation happened is, I think, very easy. Is the question, can the US keep the absolute dominance in the world, or have we to come to a more multipolar world which accept different big countries in the world? And for me, the situation from the European perspective is horrible, dangerous. Personally, when someone is asking me the question where you see the most danger for a nuclear war, I'm always saying in the conflict between China and US, not in Europe. So dangerous the situation in Ukraine is. Because in Europe we have some experience and relations between the powers there is no in Asia. So that makes the situation for me really horrible, dangerous. And about the alternative, I have not to speak again. The alternative is only common security. And then we have to solve some really difficult questions when we are discussing this. We have to solve the Taiwan question, because Taiwan is accepted as an internal problem when we accepted one China policy. But on the other side, to solve the question, we need a third partner in this game. The US must be a partner of that. That is a point we have to need much deeper discussions. So for me, the situation there is mostly dangerous, and we have to find trust-building ways. We have to see how we can engage the other surrounding countries in such a process, which also have many difficulties with China, but we need them in the discussion process. It could be not only a problem between US and China, even when we know that these countries are more or less depending from the United States, we have to engage them. And it is a process of trust building and discussions. The peace process in Europe, or the security process in Europe in the 70s, was also not falling from the heaven. It was also taking years to developing. The Helsinki process in reality starts in 67 or 68, and recognize that it starts in a very difficult situation. It starts in the situation where the Soviet Union was occupying Czech Republic. But the answer, above all, of Willy Brandt and the Western countries was not to say, we stop everything, we make sanctions against Soviet Union, we block everything. No, the answer was absolutely vice versa. They were saying, now we need the dialogue. Now we need the context. Now we need to negotiate with them for a peace process. Also for open a better way for Czech Republic. And 15 years later, this strategy was right. So we also did need this process for this region. And for me, second, and this is now the European perspective, very, very dangerous development is that the word NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a lie. NATO is the military pact in the world, the military alliance, including Asian countries. Above all, South Korea and Japan, but also some of the others, but mainly these two. And this creates even more dangerous situation, which can include also Europe in such a confrontational war. So this is a key point for us as peace movement now to take much more care of the Asian situation, and we are trying much more to inform, first of all, ourselves and then the general public about these dangers and the situation in the regions. So these regions are more and more now connected in our common anti-militaristic fight. And this, again, brings on our agenda the question how we can show these common activities, these common activities and actions against these dangers. So my answer has 2 points: trust building in the region as a positive point, but for the peace movement, much more stronger cooperation between Northeast Asia and Europe to block these NATO enlargement. And you know, we have next year's maybe the 75th years anniversary of NATO. Maybe this is a good point where we should show our common efforts and our common activities against this horrible military bloc. Short answer.
예, 짧게 대답하셨지만 중요한 말씀을 좀 하신 것 같아서 그냥 몇 가지 말씀을 좀 드리겠습니다. 일단 그 미중 갈등 문제 어떻게 볼 건지 유럽 시각에서 좀 말씀해달라고 말씀하셨는데, 일단 그 미중 갈등 아주 심플하게 미국이 지속적으로 그 자기 패권을 유지하기 위한 것이 시작이 됐다는 건 기본이고요. 근데 문제는 그렇게 시작했는데 그로 인해서 전 세계가 굉장히 위험에 처해져 가고 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 이제 그런데 유럽의 시각에서 이 문제를 보자면 사실 이 유사한 문제들이 과거에도 있었다라고 합니다. 특히 이제 1972년 헬싱키 프로세스가 시작이 됐을 때 곧바로 EU가 만들어진다거나 아니면 동서독이 어떤 대화를 나눈다거나 그러지 못했다고 하는 거죠. 그러니까 동유럽하고 이제 서유럽하고 이제 그런 이야기가 될 때까지는 신뢰가 형성이 되던 1977년까지 5년 이상의 시간이 걸렸는데, 그 경험을 유럽에서 보자면 어떠한 경우에도 생션이라든지 싸우지 말고 그래 왜 너희가 그러는지를 갖고 대화를 하자라고 하는 것을 일단 시작했다는 것이 대단히 중요합니다. 그리고 또 하나는 지금 이분이 짧게 말씀하셨지만 다른 데서 이야기한 것들을 이렇게 종합해 보면 지금 미중 갈등만이 아니라 그 미국이 우크라이나 전쟁을 이용해서 그 나토에서 계속해서 헤게모니를 행사하고 있지 않습니까? 이제 그렇게 함으로써 EU를 계속해서 미국의 컨트롤 하에 두고 있는데, 미국이 나토를 컨트롤하에 두고 있으면서 또 하나 중요한 것은 한국과 일본이 나토에 사실상 협력을 함으로써 나토의 바운더리 안에서 미국에 협력하는 형식이 지금 되어가고 있다라고 하는 겁니다. 그래서 그 부분을 굉장히 중요하게 봐야 된다는 말씀하셨고요. 이제 또 하나는 미중 갈등 문제는 그 원차이나 폴리시를 이해한다면 사실 그건 별 문제가 안 될 수 있지만 타이완이라고 한 나라를 어떻게 이해하는 것이냐에 따라서 굉장히 논란이 많아질 수 있다. 왜냐하면 그건 국가 주권 문제가 아니라 경제 문제라든지 아니면 테크놀로지의 문제라든지 굉장히 다양한 방식으로 접근할 수 있어서 그 얘기는 오늘 여기서 더 하진 않겠다는 말씀하셨고, 그래서 결론적으로 2가지 말씀하셨는데, 유럽의 시각에서 본다고 하면 결국은 어떠한 경우에도 트러스트 빌딩을 만들 수 있는 길을 뚫어내는 것이 대단히 중요하다. 헬싱키 프로세스가 그랬고 여러 가지가 그래 왔는데 마침 내년이 나토 70주년이기 때문에 나토를 어떻게 다시 볼 것인가를 계기로 해서 그런 대화를 한번 해가면 좋지 않겠느냐 하는 것하고, 2번째 대안을 얘기하신 것은 이런 대화를 할 수 있고 그래도 이런 경험을 가질 수 있고 희망이 있는 곳이 그래도 유럽이 그런 경험을 갖고 있었고 그다음에 동북아가 그런 경험을 갖고 있었기 때문에 지금 나토로 인해서 유럽과 동북아가 미국의 헤게모니 속에서 굉장히 빠른 속도로 적대시하고 군사화되어 가는 것을 바로 당사자들인 EU와 동북아가 좀 시민적 차원에서 이 문제를 어떻게 해결할 것인가를 갖고 대응해 나가는 것이 대단히 중요한 전략이 될 수 있다. 그렇게 말씀을 하시네요. 예. 그 시간이 다 돼서 예, Well, I guess this would be a final question to the host. Yep. 다 전달하셨어요? Oh, I guess she already delivered the question. They would like to know more about what is IPB and what would be your future plan. And actually, the people who are here are mostly devoted their whole life for peace. So how they could be a cooperative, yep, in your programs.
You know, Jan, it's a great pleasure for me to speak at the end about IPB. You know, what to say, IPB is more than 130 years old. It is the oldest international peace network. It was founded by a group of people which have definitely 2 very prominent names. One, I hope everyone knows this, was Bertha von Suttner, the Austrian aristocrat who wrote this famous book, The Weapons Down, and who was in the middle of the second half of the 19th century organizing the big international peace congresses. She was the first woman who got the Peace Nobel Prize in 1905. IPB itself got the Peace Nobel Prize in 1910. So we are a part of these IPB, of this Nobel laureate family, which is always coming together and create some common activities and exchanges. This is very helpful. And we have up to now 13 personalities in IPB which got during the history also the Peace Nobel Prize. Second important founder was Jean Jaurès, the French socialist, who was killed before the First World War starts. He was a very famous peace activist coming from the working class, fighting against the imperialistic wars in the beginning of the 20th century. You know, IPB through its history was always fighting against wars, because the main goal of IPB is abolishing of war, abolishing of the institution war. This definitely includes abolishing of nuclear weapons since 1945. Albert Einstein was a council member of IPB. So we were also working, some of my old friends were working with him. So that is a little bit, you know, I can tell you many things about the history, and the history of IPB shows always the problems of the peace movement. The diversity of the peace movement, the division of the peace movement, with a deep division in the beginning of the First World War, because these parts coming from the peace movement which are supporting the national wars, and these ones who are standing for abolishing wars. So huge diversity, huge discussion in IPB. You know, we were going through the Cold War period with many suggestions for overcoming the Cold War. And to say from the actual situation, I will start with the long-term goal. We will, and maybe I can invite you even today, in the year 2026, IPB will organize its third World Peace Congress. The first World Peace Congress was in 2016 in Berlin. The second was in 2021 in Barcelona. And the third one is in Asia. We will have this conference on the Philippines. Either in Manila or on Mindanao. That is a decision of our Philippine colleagues, but it will be on the Philippines. And you can see with this way and this decision how important Asia is for IPB. We know that the future is lying in Asia. And I think this is the reason we are going to Asia. IPB have also a board member two board members from Asia, and we have a majority of board members which are coming from the Global South for the first time in IPB history. Yeah, so we have a board member from South Korea, this is Se-Young from PSPD, and we have a board member, even a president from the Philippines, Corazon Fabros. You know, we have two presidents. One president is Corazon Fabros, and the second president is a former leader of a very big trade union. It's Philip Jennings, coming from Wales, living in Switzerland. These are the two presidents. You know, second big possibility for an exchange, I will not repeat it, is the NATO summit next year. We are in several coalitions. One coalition is the coalition No to War, No to NATO, which we definitely develop a counter summit and a demonstration together with our US friends in Washington, where this NATO summit will be from the 9th to the 11th of July next year. Third point, where I can only ask you, you know, above all, everyone who has a scientific background or wants scientifically to help, is to help developing ideas and suggestions for common security for Asia. This is, for me, I'm far away. It is definitely not easy. You know, I was a part of the team which developed this common security report in 2022. But now we have the difficulty, we have the challenge to develop regional strategies for common security. And definitely we need one for Northeast or East Asia, however you want to call it. And when you want to help us, when you want to work with us, you are more than welcome to do it. How you can be personally engaged in IPB, that is very easy. You can become a personal member of IPB, go to the website. Then you will always get the information, including the newsletter we are producing all 4 weeks, and definitely your organization. can become a member of IPB. Also go to the website, there is a sheet of paper, and then you can easily become a member of IPB, where you can be included in the discussions, can come with suggestions for everything, and that is a little bit the role of IPB. What is IPB doing now? When I'm here, at the same time today we have our side events in Vienna. There's a non-proliferation treaty conference starting in Vienna today, and we are organizing their 3 side events. So nuclear weapons is one of the key points of the IPB work. Another key point of the IPB work is the support of the peace activists in Russia and Ukraine. I think you know, or you can see, that we had a huge international peace conference in Vienna some weeks ago, and one of the key elements was that we have one panel where Russian and Ukrainian peace activists, online and in presence, were discussing together. And you can see they were becoming friends. And we are continue working with this. This means we are also supporting these colleagues and friends against repressions in their country. And maybe some of you saw in the news that Boris Kagalitsky was put into prison. He's a peace activist and a scientist in Russia. IPB was working closely together with him. I have really very friendly relations to him, and we immediately organized with others a protest campaign against putting him into prison because of his voices against the war. So this is the supporting of the peace activists, a key element of the IPB work. We have an own program on military budget. We are working against the military budget. We are organizing the so-called GCOMs, General Actions Against Military Spending, every year. The days after CIPRI announced the new figures, we are organizing 1 or 2, normally 2 weeks of actions against military spending. These are some elements, and we are giving every year the McBride Award. McBride was a president of IPB, a Nobel laureate, and in the sense we are supporting with this award peace activists all over the world. And some of you who are familiar with the nuclear issue, we were giving the award last year to Alexander Gment, who is the Austrian diplomat who was taking care and has a huge part of the development of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this year, we are giving the award to a Ukrainian peace activist and to a Russian lady who is also a peace activist in Russia. Both will get these awards this year. So this is some examples of the world. We have more than 400 member organizations all around the world in, I think, 76 countries. And we are definitely the biggest international network, and you are more than welcome to join all the work in cooperation with us. We are always very open to any contact, and it's great that you asked the question, and for me it's a pleasure to inform you a little bit in the last minutes about IPB.
자세한 건 인터넷에서 좀 조사하시면 좋을 것 같고요. 예. 아니, 굉장히 많은 얘기를 하셔서, 예. 근데 아까도 말씀드렸지만 굉장히 오래된 한 130년 된 조직이고요. 그다음에 초기에 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 이제 평화 운동을 굉장히 오랫동안 해왔고, 지난 한 130년 동안 한 13분의 IPB 멤버들이 각각 노벨 평화상을 받았고요. 단체가 받은 건 1910년. 그리고 처음 받은 것은 아까 얘기했던 베다프 주크나 폰 주크나 라고 하는 분이 1905년에 받았던 것이, 예, 여자분이 받았다는 게 굉장히 중요하고요. 근데 이제 아까 어쨌든 쭉 말씀하셨는데 같이 협력할 것 몇 가지를 그냥 간단하게 말씀을 드리면, 세계 평화대회를 지금 하고 있다라고 합니다. 5년에 한 번씩. 그래서 이제 2016년에 했고, 2016년에 베를린에서 했나요? 그다음에 2021년에 바르셀로나에서 했고, 2026년에 마닐라 아니면 민다나오에서 필리핀에서 하기로 결정을 했다라고 합니다. 그래서 여러분이 거기 오셔서 같이 평화대회를 참석하시면 좋겠다라는 말씀을 하셨고요. 그다음에 아까 또 커먼 시큐리티, 아시아에서의 공동 안보를 어떻게 할 것인가라는 주제를 가지고 열심히 활동하고 계셔서 특히 거기에 많은 NGO들이 같이 협력해서 하실 수 있으면 좋겠다, 이제 이런 말씀을 하셨습니다. 특히 최근에 IPB는 비핵화 문제에 굉장히 열심히 일을 하고 계시다라고 합니다. 그래서 그 문제로 여러분이 같이 좀 하시면 좋을 것 같고요. 개인이 참여해도 되고 조직이 참여해도 되고 그래서 지금 77개국의 한 400여 개 단체들이 같이 활동하고 있으니까 거기 그 회원이 되시면 항상 뉴스레터도 받아보고 또 여러분들 활동도 하실 수 있으니까 그렇게 협력할 수 있는 방법은 굉장히 다양하게 많이 있다라고 이야기를 하셨습니다. 예. 시간이 다 돼서 여기서 마무리될 것 같은데 그러면 신 목사님이 등장을 좀 하시죠. 여기 있습니다.
오늘 굉장히 그 유용하고 영감을 주는 대화 마당이었습니다. 저희들이 너무 열정적인 강연 겸 대화에 너무 감사해서 조그만 선물을 하나 준비했습니다. 우리 김용주 이사장님께서 드리시고 간단하게 마무리 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
유용한 대화 감사하고요. 이런 조직이 사실상 저는 있는 줄 몰랐습니다. 오늘 공부를 너무 많이 했고요. 그리고 앞으로 우리 한국의 평화단체가 이런 조직의 활동과 많이 배울 수 있어서 좋은 영감이고 특별히 참석해 주신 이게 말씀 주신 선생님께 감사드리고 우리 통역하시느라고 통역이 없다고 했는데 통역을 할 수밖에 없는 이기호 선생님과 우리 갑자기 이름이 기억이 안 나. 민지 선생님께 감사드립니다. 감사합니다.
이 기념품은 아주 전통적인 북마크하고 뭐 여러 가지 지갑하고 다 들어 있습니다. 다시 한번 감사드리고요. 광고 하나 하겠습니다. 저희가 8월 24일 날은 그 기사연 평화 포럼을 진행을 하는데 4시입니다. 8월 24일 4시에 이인영 전 통일부 장관을 모시고 조금 손님들이 여러분 오시기 때문에 기독교 회관에서 진행하기로 했습니다. 4시에 지금 무슨 경보가 울리는데 저희 기사연하고 화통포럼하고 NCC하고 같이 합니다. 꼭 기억하셔서 참여해 주시기 바라고요. 가시기 전에 사진 한번 찍으시고 집으로 돌아가시기 바랍니다. 앞으로 나오시죠.